Good to see you. Because I think only 20% of the people here are paying attention, I'm going to try to say enough controversial comments that Bill Panzer, my good friend here, will then debate me. And because I was told that when you have a debate, more people pay attention. So let's try to make that happen. All right. So we've had an exciting time this year. I think there was a key point in time in late February of this year where the media mostly missed it. The same day that the Obama administration, through Eric Holder, the Attorney General, said that the feds were going to basically call off the dogs on the raids in California, the same day that that announcement happened on C-SPAN was the same day that the New Mexico state government issued the first license for a medical marijuana dispensary that any state government has ever issued in the history of the country. And a USA Today reporter called me a couple of days later and said, what do you think about this announcement from the Obama administration, and can you give me anything that's juicy beyond the obvious story that we've all heard? And I said, yeah, check this out. First state license, blah, 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 New Mexico. And she's like, that's great. It didn't even appear in the USA Today when I gave her that tip. So I think that like the key thing that I think should have been the story was not the story, which was at the same time that the feds were calling off the raids orally before the written memo was released, was the same day that a state license was issued. Since then, we actually passed a new law in Rhode Island, which is going to allow for 3 medical marijuana dispensaries in Rhode Island. I don't know how many people heard about the initiative that just passed in Maine on Tuesday. By a show of hands, how many people heard about the initiative in Maine? Fantastic. That initiative, we drafted it, we started that signature drive, and then the Drug Policy Alliance finished the signature drive. It was a partnership. That initiative passed with 59% of the vote on Tuesday night, and as a result, Maine is going to have an unlimited number of medical marijuana dispensaries. There's no limit to them. So now we have 3 states that have state-issued licenses for dispensaries, New Mexico, Rhode Island, and Maine. And then there's 2 states where there are dispensaries where there's not state-issued licenses, but a more informal process, usually involving city-issued licenses, and those, of course, are California and Colorado. So we have 5 states. Now, here's the wave of the future. What we found through lobbying in state legislatures over the last few years, in the early days, state legislatures only wanted to pass bills that allowed patients to grow their own, caregivers to grow for them, but certainly no sale of medical marijuana. Sale is much more dangerous than growing your own, they said. And that was the case in 2000 in Hawaii, 2004 in Vermont. Those were the early days. Now, what we're finding is state legislators actually say, we'd rather have dispensaries because we'd actually like there to be a place where patients could buy from a store rather than buying on the street. And so now what we're finding is that state legislators want us to pass bills with dispensaries. And so we passed a bill in New York that we passed the Assembly side. It's pending in the New York State Senate. In Illinois, we passed it on the Senate side. It's pending in the House. In Minnesota, we passed a watered-down bill. It was vetoed by the governor. We're going to come back in 2011 and pass it then when that governor is no longer in office. It's definitely going to have dispensaries in it. Massachusetts, the bill has dispensaries. We think we're going to pass it in the next 8 months. New Hampshire, we just passed a bill with dispensaries. It was vetoed. We overrode the governor's veto in the House, failed by 2 votes in the Senate. We think we're going to be able to get those 2 votes either this coming year or the year after and make medical marijuana legal in New Hampshire. So if you count them up, Delaware, we're going to pass the Senate for sure in a couple months, probably the whole legislature. Iowa will probably pass the Senate, not the House. The point is that we're actually teetering on the edge of passing medical marijuana bills with dispensaries in 7 or so state legislatures in the next year and a half. And that is a sea change. When you go from 3 or 5 states to 12 states where medical marijuana is sold through storefronts, where they're issued licenses by the state government, where the people growing, by the way, are actually legal, which is a big deal. People growing medical marijuana in these states where we have bills pending will be legal. It's not going to be a gray area. That is a big deal. And then, of course, we shouldn't forget about Arizona. Where in Arizona, we're finishing a signature drive right now, which will have medical marijuana dispensaries legalized across the state of Arizona, 120 or so dispensaries. That'll start up after we pass that initiative in November of next year. The polling shows we're ahead 65-35. We have no reason to believe we're going to lose, and so we're going to have 120 dispensaries started up in Arizona in early 2011. Can you imagine having this conversation just 5 or 6 years ago? 5 or 6 months ago? It's a completely different world. I mean, it was almost impossible to pass the first medical marijuana bill through the first state legislature in Hawaii in 2000. Now we're talking about lobbyists in 8 state capitals. We might pass bills in 7 out of the 8 in a year and a half. It's just unbelievable progress. And there's a lot of organizations to thank for that. There's grassroots activists, there's grass tops activists, there's medical marijuana dispensary operators, growers, MPP, ASA, NORML, etc. There's a whole raft of organizations that have brought us to this point. It's an exciting time. I don't know, am I allowed to talk about something about more than just medical marijuana on this? So, the future. So the future is more than just medical cannabis. The polling has shown, the Gallup organization is the only institution that's done polling the same question on making marijuana legal for more than medical use since 1969. The polling back in 1969 was like 12% or something horrible. And then it's increased over time, it dipped down in the 80s, and now we found just 2 weeks ago, they just released their most recent poll, 44% of the American people think that marijuana should be legal for recreational use. 44%. So what does that mean? That means obviously it's higher than 44% in California. It's obviously higher in Nevada, Alaska, and so forth. So we actually have a chance of passing initiatives and eventually bills in states in the West and then eventually in New England to make marijuana completely legal, to tax and regulate it similarly to alcohol. And if I had to guess, I would say that the first 3 states to do so will be, and I hope that all 3 will happen as soon as possible, but 2012 I think would be great, is Nevada, where we're going to put an initiative on the ballot to tax and regulate like alcohol. Colorado, where things are exploding right now, and the number of dispensaries is increasing at such a rapid rate that I think in Colorado in 3 years people are going to think of marijuana as being quasi-legal, and therefore why not just tax and regulate it for everyone. And then of course in California, where I think that we're going to have a majority of support in California in November of 2012. So I think what we're seeing is 2 tracks in this movement. We're going to have dispensaries popping up in 5 to 12 states over the next 3 years, and then you're going to see marijuana becoming completely legal in perhaps 3 states in 3 years. And then there'll be a new president, and then that'll be a big question. If it's the same president that we have now, my hunch is that there will be mostly a hands-off approach and letting states move forward with however they see to do these things. If there's someone from the Republican Party who takes the White House, then maybe you're going to see a rollback or a lot of extra conflict, more conflict than we've seen currently on the state level. But I think the point is, this is my conclusion, we need to push as hard and fast as we can on dispensary legislation, 1 or 2 dispensary initiatives, and taxing and regulating marijuana over the next 3 years while we have the momentum and while we have a White House that's mostly hands-off on these issues. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bill Panzer. I'm an attorney. Helped write Prop 215. My practice is 90-95% medical cannabis and cannabis cases. I'm on the NORML Board of Directors, Cal NORML Board of Directors, and I'm two-time winner of the Sonoma Alliance for Medical Marijuana Compassion and Action Award, which I had up in my bedroom for about 3 years before I realized it was the CIA award. So I've been up here on the stage for this event since the beginning, both speaking. I've played here solo. I've done a duet with Chris over there, and Conrad, and I've had my band up here, so it's good to be back. Now, I wish I could have the optimism, share the optimism that Don and Mikki and Rob and everybody up here is talking about, but I can't. You know, I've always said about the press that if the press gets something 40% accurate, they're doing an unusually good job. Not that I malign the press, it's just, I live and breathe something for months and months, and then some reporter's going to talk to me for 5 or 10 minutes and learn it all. It's just not going to happen. Well, the press has been gushing about this new federal policy.
And I know
how many of you have heard about the new federal policy to
right
leave medical alone?
Medicine,
right?
booth, and they have
how many of you actually read the memo itself? Yeah, go read the memo. The memo says marijuana is still illegal, all use is still illegal, and we want to stop drugs in this country. It says, as a U.S. attorney, you have discretion to prosecute whoever you want to prosecute. But consider your resources and think carefully before you go after, for example, a cancer patient and their caregiver. That's what it says. Think carefully before you go after a cancer patient. I don't see that as, if you're in compliance with state law, we're going to leave dispensaries alone. I'm sorry, I don't see that. More importantly, the U.S. Attorney here in Northern California, who was appointed by George W. Bush and is still in office, he doesn't see it that way either. He sees it as there has been no change in policy. And the local DEA agents, who are still being told what to do by the Bushies, who are still there, see it as there's been no change in policy. I don't think we're going to, I do agree that probably the feds are not going to be as ruthless and as savage about it as they have been under the Bush administration, and the Clinton administration for that matter. But don't fool yourselves. The feds are still out there, and they're still going to be busting people, doing smash and grabs, etc. I think if we're going to get any relief from this administration, it would be during a second term, when Obama doesn't have to worry about getting reelected, and then maybe think about his youth and what he did, and say other people shouldn't go to jail for things that he did. Now, we have some interesting things going on. It looks good, but there's problems too. Here in Sonoma County, the county officials have shut down Marvin's Gardens. Marvin's Gardens, a true collective dispensary that's been operating, they were there 9, 10 years, at least, wonderful people. They were shut down by the county because they don't have a permit. Well, Marvin's Gardens applied for a permit, and they waited 1.5 years, and there was no decision made. Sonoma County has not issued a single permit yet for a dispensary. There's a rumor Organican is about to get one, but it has not been issued as of yesterday. And then in Los Angeles, we have the district attorney saying that 100% of the dispensaries are illegal and he's going to shut them all down. Well, as bad as that sounds, I got to tell you, a lot of them there are not technically legal. I think most of the dispensaries in California are technically not legal, in that the only lawful way to run a dispensary under state law is as a patient association, owned by the members. It's a closed group, it's owned by the members. If some guy owns it, and he's taking home the money and putting it under his mattress at night, that's... I'm not saying that shouldn't be allowed. I think that people, it's a free country, capitalism, people should be allowed to have their stores and sell cannabis, not just for medical, but for all reasons, for responsible adult use. But under the law that we have now, a sole proprietorship or a partnership owning a dispensary technically is not legal. And the DAs around the state are starting to figure this out. And I think what you're going to be seeing in the near future is going to be a lot of dispensaries being shut down. I think that the days of the wild, wild west where the entrepreneur comes in, finds a corner in LA and opens up the door and makes $200,000–300,000 a year, those days are over. And they're fast coming to a close. But I think what is going to rise in its way is going to be patient collectives, true patient collectives that will provide medicine to patients at a reasonable cost. Nobody's going to get rich off of it, but a lot of people are going to get some very good medicine for less than what they've been paying. I'm very excited about SB 390, the Damiano bill, that there's talk about reasonable talk, rational talk, serious talk about legalizing. I'm very excited. Last Tuesday, I attended the oral argument in the Kelly case in front of the California Supreme Court. The Kelly case, as you may know, is the case where the Court of Appeal struck down the numerical guidelines, the 12 immature or 6 mature and up to plants and up to 8 ounces of bud. Kelly case said those guidelines are unconstitutional. That case was in front of the Supreme Court, oral argument on Tuesday, and what amazed me, first of all, is the Attorney General's lawyer got up there first and said to the justices, we want to tell you we agree with Kelly. It's unconstitutional. And the justices looked and they said, wait a minute, did you change your position? And he said, well, let's say our position has evolved. So those numbers are going to get struck down. But what was even more amazing was one of the justices, in questioning the lawyers, asked, if marijuana were legalized, how would that affect the medical marijuana law? I mean, here was a justice of the Supreme Court talking reasonably about the possibility of marijuana legalization. I mean, we have come a long way. And I know that with people, like the people in this room, the people that put this on, the people who have been working on this for the last 13, 15, 20, 30 years, as they keep working along, we're going to keep making progress. And I think that we're going to find within the next few years that cannabis will be available for patients almost throughout this country safely. And I think that, and I didn't think before, but I think I may actually see complete legalization in my lifetime. And I hope to have a lot of that lifetime left to enjoy that complete legalization. Thank you.
We have some time for questions or comments. Anybody have any questions? Questions, Dale.
Yeah, Don, you're from LA, so what do you think is going to happen in LA with all this huffing and puffing by the DA?
Dale asked what is going to happen in LA, and I'll tell you, LA is really the front lines right now. And we have a district attorney and a city attorney who are really out to get the medical marijuana collectives. And it is probably true that many, I won't say most, but many of these facilities are operating outside the law. And the problem in LA is that our city attorney blocked regulations for 2 years while the city council was trying to adopt sensible regulations that would have controlled the proliferation of medical marijuana dispensaries and reined in some of the most egregious behavior by some of these fellows. And so we have a bad situation in Los Angeles. However, we have many city council members in that city who, in response to grassroots pressure and to many, many years of lobbying, are committed to regulating medical cannabis and not to banning it. And we have to remember that 4 or 5 years ago in Los Angeles, the thinking was we're going to ban medical marijuana. We're going to shut this down. We're not going to have it. And now we have on the city council a champion of regulations who is a 30-year veteran of the LAPD, Councilmember Dennis Zine, who to this day, despite the proliferation and the bad PR and the bad behavior of many of the medical marijuana facilities there, is still committed to regulations. And so the next step is that the Planning and Land Use Management Committee and the Public Safety Committee are having a joint committee meeting a week from Monday on the 16th, and they're going to talk about the city attorney's draft ordinance. And I can tell you this from working with these people, talking to their staff, talking to the council members, they really are not happy with the city attorney right now, and they're not trusting his input. And I think we have a great opportunity a week from Monday to highlight the city attorney's folly and his bad advice. He's been bad all along the way. He was bad about the moratorium, he was bad about the extension, he's been bad about the lawsuits. He's just been wrong every step of the way. And I think in Los Angeles, we have a great opportunity a week from now to make a big impact before the city council and shut the city attorney down. And then the city council can go out and do what they know is right. So we're going to try to turn out a huge crowd there and make a big impact on the city council. And this is important because so goes LA, so goes many, many cities and counties in the state of California. So we're going to make a difference there in a week. And if any of you are thinking about vacations, come down to LA a week from Monday. We need you.
I have a question for Don also, as an extension of this. You know, the city of Oakland passed Measure F, which will enable the city to collect taxes on any cannabis business there. I'm wondering, is that a realistic track for LA because they could be getting millions and millions and millions of dollars?
Well, most of the medical marijuana businesses in Los Angeles will not survive the regulatory process. And I think that's okay because what we'll be left with is a smaller number of legally organized and operated patients, collectives, or cooperatives. And so I'm happy about that. However, Councilmember Janice Hahn has proposed a tax and regulate initiative that would apply to medical cannabis facilities that would help the city recoup the cost of regulation. And so that's on the table, but probably not on the immediate horizon. I would guess, based on what I've seen in Oakland, Mikki asked, by the way, how many will be left, and I don't know for sure, but I would guess based on what I've seen in Oakland, San Francisco, Berkeley, other cities and counties around the state of California, is that we'll see the number of facilities drop by about 50% and then slowly climb as people are able to comply with the land use and the operational protocols. And ultimately, even though that's going to be difficult, I think that's going to be a positive process for patients in Los Angeles. Other questions?
When marijuana becomes legal, how much credence do you give to the train of thought that the business model is going to change and that it's going to be controlled by giant corporations?
Well, it's an interesting question, and it depends on the degree of legality. The question is, once cannabis becomes legal completely for recreational use, what do we think will happen as far as being controlled by big industry? Will corporate dollars come in and take it over? What's the future going to look like? I think it really depends on the degree of legality. I mean, if it's regulated, like making wine or something like that, then there may be regulations that prevent people from cultivating it themselves. But if it's legal to the point where you can go down to the store and buy corn seeds and plant corn in your backyard, you can go buy, cannabis seeds for 89 cents and go plant that in your backyard, I think that would prevent, big corporate takeover. That's just my feeling.
I think it's highly likely that it'll end up looking a lot like alcohol because if marijuana were to become completely legal for adult recreational use, it's unlikely that the government would still stick with any kind of prohibition on the cultivation of one plant for recreational use. They're not really going to kick in doors on one plant or two plants. At the same time, if you want to grow 8,000 plants for your own personal use, then that would probably, some people I guess are hooting and hollering and they would like that, it's unlikely that you could do that without a license and a tax and regulate scheme. So I think what you'll end up seeing is something like alcohol, where at least in Pennsylvania where I'm from, and I know that the laws are similar in most states, is that you can brew up to 200 gallons of beer a year without any permit for personal use, and you can brew some number of gallons of wine, or not brew, but whatever. and so forth. And so the numbers change in terms of gallons and so forth of wine and beer and so forth, state to state per year. But the point is that there's a combination of that personal, recreational production that doesn't require any permitting or taxes. But then if you cross the threshold, then it kicks in to a permit and a tax. It's hard for me to imagine that if we have a tax and regulate scheme for marijuana, that we're not going to see something that's similar to how we've been actually handling alcohol for many, many decades.
Why not tobacco? Why alcohol? You can grow as many tobacco plants as you want to. You can sell it in auctions. You can grow as many tobacco plants as you want to in Virginia or the only thing that gets regulated is sell it. You have to sell it for resale license.
Right. Well, I think there is definitely an issue as far as legalization goes, where corporate entities either will be developed or put into place. I'm working now with people who own, California-based businesses who are willing to start investing into the medical marijuana field, and I mean, that's a far stretch from even legalization at this point, but there are people who are willing to step up, and I think you will see, maybe not, major corporations on a national level if it was just a California thing, but I think there's some people with pretty deep pockets in California who would be willing to invest in a market like that. So I think there is a definite corporatization that would be on the horizon. I think part of the legalization thing that hasn't really been talked about is what does that look like afterwards? After the big party on, November of 2010, after we passed this thing, how does it implement into real life? What does it look like as far as, corporations coming in? Do we lose what's special about cannabis to us at this point? I mean, do we lose, what we fought so hard for? And, the reason why cannabis is special to people is that, it's grown in small batches, it's grown by mom and pop organizations, it's, manicured and put to a hands. And I think you find that in the wine industry, though, that there are some, very high model wines out there that are still, family brewed for many years. But you also have your $2 chuck, so I think you're going to find, maybe a disparity of models, something like that. I think, Rob's right that, that there will have to be some regulatory practice on probably the amounts and limits, and the people with the bigger pockets are going to be able to, afford to get into that market a lot easier than, maybe some of the people who are growing right now, but it'll also open up a model for, like home brewers, so I think there's definitely that possibility.
Chris?
Yeah, I'm just wondering what you guys' observations are in terms of three areas that seem particularly controversial to me. The first is that we have like alcohol and things that are kept to be 1,000 feet away from a school, and what that means for zoning. The second is this no smoking cigarettes indoors, and what that means to social use in club settings or something like that. And the third thing has to do with the driving issue, how you see that playing out. These are three areas I'd like to get your impression of what the future means for all of those.
Well, thank you, Chris. Chris Conrad, by the way, one of our luminaries in this movement. Thank you for those good questions. He's asking about zoning issues and about smoking indoors, and also about the issues of driving under the influence of cannabis.
1,000 feet from school. 1,000 feet from a school.
1,000 feet, yes. And so many of our cities and councils, county board of supervisors have confused the 1,000-foot issue. And they think because SB 420 uses this magic but arbitrary number of 1,000 feet, that that's how far a patient's collective or cooperative has to be from many sensitive uses. And by sensitive uses, I mean schools and churches and playgrounds and what have you. And that's nonsense. A well-regulated, a properly organized and operated medical marijuana collective or cooperative could be next door to a preschool, and it would not be a problem. Now, I don't think that's a political reality in our state right now, but these ideas that medical marijuana has to be excluded and kept away from children or churches or what have you is nonsense, and that speaks to bias. And bias is the excuse that our regulators use to stigmatize us and discriminate against medical cannabis patients. And while it may be necessary at the end of the day to accept buffer zones around medical marijuana facilities from schools and churches and playgrounds and what have you. It's certainly not necessary. And every time this issue comes up, people should stand against it and say no. Medical marijuana facilities are safe, and they're necessary, and they're legal, and these places should be allowed in any commercial zone. Having said that, if we need a buffer zone, it should be as small as possible, and the number of sensitive uses around which it should be as small as possible. And when it comes to driving under the influence of cannabis, I want to take the perhaps unpopular stand of saying this: don't do it. I know some of you think that you can drive just as well under the influence of cannabis as you can when you're not under the influence of cannabis. And that may or may not be the case. I'm concerned it may not be the case, but even if it is, you may lose your driver's license. And it is an impossible position to be in as an advocate to go to a city council or to board of supervisors or to the state legislature and say to them it's okay to drive when you're stoned. So I would encourage everyone to use the same caution you do with alcohol as you do with cannabis. And if you have to drive with cannabis, put it in the trunk, if nothing else, to protect yourself. To protect yourself from a DUI and to protect yourself from a police officer abusing his power to shut you down. So just put it in the trunk, and if you have to smoke when you're driving, pull over, smoke a joint, and jump back in the car that doesn't smell like cannabis and drive to where you're going. And I'll leave it at that. I think some other panelists are going to talk.
Now, regarding the driving, I'm sure most of you out there heard the recent news about Tim Lincecum, Giants Cy Young Award-winning pitcher. And I'm listening to sports talk radio, and they're talking about it, and they're saying, well, he had the buds and the pipe in his car, and the cops smelled it. He must have been smoking in the car. And they were real upset about that. And I'm thinking, I've seen cases, I see how this works. Now imagine, the cops pull over this late model Mercedes. They walk up, and who do they see driving it? What looks like, if anybody's seen Tim Lincecum, he looks like he's 16 years old. He really does. He's about 22, 23. He looks 16. So they see this late model Mercedes, and they pull it over, and it's this long-haired teenager driving it. Well, the cops know. All they got to do is say, I smell marijuana. And that gives them, whether they do or not, if they say it, it gives them the right to search the car, because no judge will question them. And I'll bet you that's what happened with Tim Lincecum. And then they search the car, and they don't find anything. The person goes on their way, and nobody ever knows about it, except the person tells a few of their friends, and that's it. They do find something, they tell the judge, I smelled marijuana. So, for that reason, driving with cannabis in your car is not smart. Now, I'll tell you, I was at the Normal Conference in September, and the last day there was a panel on marijuana and sports. And one of the people was a wrestler named Rob Van Dam. And Rob Van Dam is the 420 wrestler. That's his gig. He's into cannabis. I got to spend some time, my wife and I, with Rob Van Dam because our son is a big wrestling fan, and we had to get his autograph for him. And he's a very nice guy, but he got up there and he talked about driving, and he said all this stuff about driving on pods like alcohol is bullshit. And to a great extent, he's right, in the sense that certainly if I'm driving down the road, I'd feel better if the person coming at me was stoned than if they were drunk. I mean, there's the saying, the drunk driver comes to the stop sign and blows right through it without even slowing down. The stoned driver comes to the stop sign and stops and waits for it to turn green. But, even Don's right, even if you can drive safely on cannabis, and studies have shown, by the way, that while people on alcohol tend to drive faster and take more chances, people on cannabis tend to drive slower and take fewer chances. But even if you can do it, you're risking losing your license, and God forbid if you should get into an accident that has nothing to do with the cannabis, and they take your blood level, and it shows that you had cannabis, you could be looking at a manslaughter DUI felony. What about police dogs? Well, but he's asking about police dogs and smelling and all that. I mean, look, I've seen cases where my clients swore up and down to me, that the cop took the dog's head, rubbed it on the back of the car and said, "Look, he's alerting," and went in. The fact is, our criminal justice system is based on 3 universal truths, and you better get used to this. 1, all defendants are guilty. 2, cops lie. 3, judges ignore number 2 because of number 1. So you got to protect yourself. That's why I also say, especially if you're transporting more than an ounce, you're transporting your medicine, use seal-a-meal. Use a vacuum sealer. Anything else, the cop says, "I smelled it," I can't prove that he didn't smell it. If it's vacuum sealed, we can bring that into court. All right, officer, here's 6 knapsacks. One of them has vacuum sealed cannabis in it. Tell me which one by smell has it. He won't be able to. So, you know, great idea, in your trunk, vacuum sealed, and don't be driving down the road smoking a joint. Not real good. As far as smoking indoor laws, I mean, it's going to be applied to smoking cannabis. I don't see why not. Though I think that's a good reason, another good reason for vaporizing. You know, vaporizing is healthier, there's no smoke, it's more scientific in people's eyes, so that may be the answer to that one.
It could also be, we could also go down the road of like hookah bars and things like that, that does license areas for cannabis consuming, and hopefully that will happen. I'd like to just add that we do need to figure out, or technology needs to come up with a good way of determining whether somebody is impaired. I'm hoping for impairment testing rather than testing of blood or saliva, because a lot of the people who are major regular cannabis consumers really don't even get high anymore. that much, if they have that much in their system. But unfortunately, that is what comes up by our opponents. The law enforcement is very concerned at the hearings in Sacramento. They did bring up drug driving and try to scare everybody about that. So there is going to be a need to come up with a way of determining it to society's satisfaction.
I just wanted to speak to what Mikki just mentioned. And I read an article a few weeks ago. I think it was Polaroid has been working, their scientists have been working for quite a while. In the next few months, they expect to introduce a small handheld device that law enforcement can use alongside the road, similar to an alcohol breathalyzer. It tests for 5 things, marijuana being number 1, of course. Now, we'll have to challenge the technology. Maybe Bill or one of the attorneys can talk about how they go through doing that to make sure that this is actual science and not some sort of a witch doctor's voodoo box. But you know, if we can put a man in the moon, we ought to be able to figure out if we're driving under the influence or not. So at some point, our days are numbered. It looks like it's just the next few months. Then, of course, all these broke police departments have to go out and buy these things. But they'll make those number 1. And then that will end, though, a lot of the resistance we've had from law enforcement and some politicians on legalization, because this is a big thing for them. It truly scares them that we're all out there smoking and driving, and we shouldn't be.
Another question?
It's been asked already, but I've got a question for, in light of the new announcements of Mueller and Obama, are we any closer to being able to brand similar to the wine industry and work with dispensaries, like maybe limit the number of dispensaries, one or more dispensaries? Actually, more than
That's illegal.
we're not there yet.
No, that's illegal under state and federal law. The question was, are we close to, like in the wine industry, where like one person could grow cannabis and distribute it to several dispensaries? The answer is that is illegal under both state and federal law. Are we close to changing the law? I don't know. We're closer than we've ever been. How far away we are, I don't know. Excuse me?
How much are you allowed to grow for a dispensary?
The question is, how much are you allowed to grow and sell to a dispensary? The answer is nothing. You're not allowed to grow and sell to dispensaries. The only distribution that is legal under California law, 2 models. 1, the caregiver can distribute it to the patient. 2, one member of a patient association can distribute it to another member of a patient association. That's it. You can't grow and sell to dispensaries. And for God's sakes, if you're growing your own and the cops come in, don't think, oh, I think I have too much, so I'll tell them the rest I'm going to sell to a dispensary. Okay? Because then you're confessing to illegal activity. In fact, if the cops come in, you don't say anything other than, I'd like to speak to an attorney. Okay?
How, if you are working with a collective dispensary, and you are a better farmer than farmer B, the dispensary thinks that your medical marijuana is better
Yeah.
than something else, how do you go about working in that regard?
Okay, the question is, if you are a member of a collective and they like what you can grow, how do you do it? The answer is, if you're growing your own and selling it to the collective, even if it's a collective you are a member of, my belief is that is illegal. However, you can be hired as an employee of the collective to tend the garden. So what you're growing doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the collective. From the moment it breaks ground, it belongs to the collective. You are tending that garden, you can be reimbursed for your actual out-of-pocket expenses. You could be paid reasonable rent if it's from your land or your basement. You could be paid an hourly wage, keep track of the time you put into it, or a reasonable salary. But that is the collective's cannabis, it's not yours. That you can do. Right, you can't sell it by the pound. Can't do that. So what? If it belongs, okay, if you are a member of Fred's Collective, and the cannabis you're growing belongs to Fred's Collective, it doesn't belong to you, how could you sell it to Shirley's Collective? It ain't yours.
No, Shirley also
No. It belongs, Fred's Collective is 100 people. That cannabis belongs to those 100 people. It's theirs. If you take it and you sell it to somebody else, you're stealing it from them.
and if Shirley wants 100 also, then you grow 100 for her.
You're a member of Fred's Collective. It's not Shirley, no. Okay. You can't, look, people come to me all the time. Everyone wants to know, how can I be legal and make money? Okay?